Okay, before we start, I'm going to introduce our two moderators today. First one is Mr. Harry Ying, Senior Advisor for U.S. House of Representatives, Honorable Ro Khanna, State of California Commissioner for Economic Development, Vice Chair of APAPA National, the President of San Francisco Bay Area Region, President of California China Trade Committee, the founder and president of USA-China Link. Harry was the chairman of Fremont Chamber of Commerce, and he was the assistant governor of Rotary International District 5170. Harry is also the president of Fremont Rotary Club. Another moderator who is working on the clubhouse, Another wonderful moderator is Mr. Hong Yue Fang. He is a co-producer of Asian Americans Network at Clubhouse. This club currently ranked #1 Asian Americans Club. Hong is a leadership development mentor and organizer of Mentoring Club, global team leadership consultant for Silicon Valley Alliance, and instructor in software project management and scaled agility for UCSC Silicon Valley Extension. Now I'm going to transfer the stage to our moderator, Mr. Harry Ying. Harry, the stage is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Diana. Good evening, everyone. It is my true honor to be the moderator for today's program. For almost 2 years, the COVID-19 has brought the whole world the most chaos in our life. We're fortunate to be alive after close to 5 million people died as of yesterday. Even today, some offices, schools and factories, stores and shops are still locked down in many cities in almost every country. So most people's wallets are shrinking from less work or laid off. Government try to give us subsidies, encourage us buying more stuff. However, we can only working from home, causing many using the online ordering with Amazon, eBay, or others instead of in-person shopping. So e-commerce has become the most convenient shopping way, making it one of the most, probably one of very few winners in this pandemic. In the meantime, so-called zero virus tolerance policy forces factories to shut down, many countries close borders. The freight industry had to lay off more and more people. So the entire freight transportation worldwide by land, sea, or the air have been in chaos. So give you one good example. The port of Long Beach in California, handling 40% of US import ocean freight, has been long jammed up with 80 or more container ships waiting to be offloaded for several weeks. The ocean freight cost has been jacked up 10 times in the last 1 year, from 2,000 to almost 20,000 per container. Now, the truck driver shortage is even worse, has raised to about 80,000 in the US, when 12 billion tons of goods are reliant on them to haul on the road a year. So the entire needed increasing of transportation has been totally out of balance between supply and demand. Now, consumers like you and me, we are at the tail end of these chain reactions. So finally, we start feeling the highest inflation in 13 years. So a crossing board cutbacks made a global-wide worry that a next recession is just around the corner. All of a sudden, Amazon permanently banned over tens of thousands of their seller accounts in violation of their review fraud. So blog accounts reaches as many as 50,000 or even more. During this time, the 3.5 years long US and China trade war, now we can call it another Cold War, is nowhere near its end. So this whole series of global supply chain gridlock plus Amazon's sudden actions directly impact to almost all walks of life, from individuals to business, large or small, to all sorts of industries, to the national economy, to the international trading, particularly between US and China, which are the two largest trading partners in the world today. So after knowing how this chain reaction happened, we are eager to wonder if there may be any feasible solutions. Today, we are very fortunate to have 4 experts in this field, plus over hundreds of audience. I'm hoping today's program can be very informative and with ideas for solutions. So now, please let today's 4 panelists introduce themselves in the alphabetical orders by their last name. So please have the first slide. And John for 2 minutes, and then followed by Rosemary. John. John, unmute yourself.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, hello. My name is John Choate. So I have over 40 years in supply chain. And I started, as you can see in the career, sort of a unique slide is on the left are the companies and the contract manufacturers that I've worked with around the world. And on the right are some of the top customers. So I got my platform starting in the Air Force. I was a global logistics and systems officer, commanding one of the largest logistics squadrons in the Air Force of over 1,500 people. And in the last, I was implementing global supply chain solutions over 360 sites worldwide. I started my career in Corning Glass as a site supervisor, and I worked myself all the way up to a global vice president in manufacturing and supply chain. And I'm currently, as you see right here, with L&T Technologies as their top supply chain person. Academically, undergraduate, research biology, master's in behavioral psychology, and an executive MBA in lean manufacturing. And in my spare time, I'm a member of several professional societies, ASCM, ISM, ASQ, where I'm actually a board level. And then the big thing that I bring in, that part of the presentation, so I've been both in the private and the public sector, and I've also lived offshore in Mexico and in China.
Thank you, John. Rosemary, please.
Hey, everybody. I'm Rosemary Codes. I am the president and founder of Blue Silk Consulting, which is a global supply chain management consulting firm. I've been doing management consulting and have worked for Hewlett Packard and some other big companies and have been doing this for about 35 years. I also founded and run the Reshoring Institute, where we are today helping companies evaluate their global manufacturing strategy and determining where in the world they should be manufacturing. I've worked with over 80 supply chain clients worldwide, very often in foreign countries, spend lots and lots of time in China. And I've written 5 books on supply chain management that you can see there. My background is in business and logistics, finance and operations management was the focus of my MBA. And there are the books along the bottom. I want to point to the one on the far right called Legal Blacksmith. I do a fairly significant amount of expert witness work where I get involved in global supply chain disputes. And on one case that I was working on with an attorney in Cleveland, we worked together for about a year on this case, me as the expert and she was the lead attorney, and we decided to write a book together. So that particular book is written in each chapter has 2 sections. One is on the functional area, such as forecasting, planning, procurement, manufacturing, warehousing, logistics. And then the back half of each chapter has the legal precedent and the legal clauses that need to be included in your contract. So it's a sort of handy dandy desk reference. The one on the far left is 42 rules for sourcing and manufacturing in China. I've worked extensively in China, helping companies set up their global supply chains. And I'm really looking forward to answering the questions today.
Thank you, Rosemary. Greg, Tanaka, please. You may unmute. No? Unmute yourself.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, please.
Okay, so sorry. Well, Henry, Diana, really appreciate both of you guys, and Hong, thank you for organizing this. Really appreciate this opportunity. So my name is Greg Lynn Tanaka. I currently serve on the Palo Alto City Council. I'm on my 2nd term right now. And I have quite a bit of experience with the supply chain issue. So my company, Percolata, where I'm founder and CEO, we worked with 35 large retail chains. So these had footprints all over the world, Japan, China, US, all over Europe. And the kind of work that we did for them was forecasting. So we would forecast basically the demand that they would get, and then also hook up into their inventory management systems so they could figure out when they needed to place orders, and we would forecast that. So I have a very detailed technical perspective of the challenges involved with trying to get the supply chain truly humming. It's quite difficult. The other perspective I have is I'm also running for US Congress. I'll be running for election next year. And one of the big reasons why I'm running is Asian American representation. So in Santa Clara County, where I'm running, we're 40% Asian, or nearly 40% Asian, but only 6% of the elected officials are Asian. In Congress, is even worse, only 3% are Asian, this versus 6% of the population. And I believe that the country should have a stronger relationship with China and the rest of Asia, especially from the West Coast point of view. It's one of the fastest growing parts of the world. And I believe that for the United States, what's really important for us is to have a vibrant economy. So I have a very strong perspective on the federal and regulatory aspects of supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last not least, Dr. Shanghua Young.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank Diana and Henry for inviting me to this event. I'm Shanghua Young. I'm a professor of international business, and I'm director of China Business Studies Initiative at the University of San Francisco School of Management. For over 25 years, I've been teaching and researching international business around the world. I publish in the area of internationalization of firms, international R&D strategic alliances, sustainable business, and corporate social responsibility. As an academic leader, I organize international conferences in industry forums and serve as journal editor. And I frequently speak at academic industry conferences and forums. I have been at the USF since 2009. USF is a 165 years old Jesuit university in San Francisco and one of the oldest universities in California. The school management will celebrate its centennial in about 3 years. One of the first business schools credited with the prestigious AACSB. I have been leading China Business Studies Initiative, the only research center focused on international business at the USF, for the last 8 years. Cbsi is San Francisco Silicon Valley-based thought leader, knowledge hub, and relationship builder for businesses in the US, China, Asia, and the rest of the world. Cbsi leverages the Jesuits' historical connection with China, Asia, and 500 years Jesuit tradition of linking global education with commerce. I am very honored to be part of this distinguished panel, and I look forward to discussion about all the topics, Amazon and the US-China relationship and the global supply chain topics. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you so much to all the 4 panelists. It's definitely my honor to be part of the team. Now, I'd like to share with everyone today's panel discussion will be conducted in the following format. First, based on their personal preferences, 2 panelists will address the first 2 topics. Those are the global supply chain gridlock and Amazon case for 5 minutes each. A third panelist may comment for 2 minutes. Second, all 4 panelists will address the last topic, which is the impact to US-China trade for 4 minutes each. Unfortunately, I'm only given 60 minutes for this entire panel session. I'd like to offer final remark to all 4 panelists if time allows. For all audience and guests, please submit your written questions to Hong Fong in the chat box. We have prepared another 20 minutes for the Q&A. All right, now let's start with the first topic, global supply chain gridlock. Please upload the first slide. Sandy. Sandy, are you there?
I think Sandy dropped.
Diana, can you please?
Yes, Harry, Sandy said her internet was cut off. So you can go ahead and I will figure out then how to solve the problem. Just go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, so let me upload this picture. Now, I'd like to give you some ideas about the so-called global supply chain. Now, from this picture, you can see that now the light gray to the left shows from 1992 to roughly year 2000. The supply chain was in a so-called push manufacturing format. Manufacturers basically produce to stock in advance. Then near the year 2000, a little bit over, internet unlabeled manufacturing, making a huge change. Information replaced inventory. Both supply and the demand share the view of the same data. So global supply chain was able to be elevated to so-called the demand pool manufacturing. The dark gray you can see to the right. Now, at this time, the well-known terminology back to the early 2000s was called just-in-time, or JIT. Allow manufacturers to produce per order based on demand and the forecast. Thank you. So if you don't mind, let me move up another one. Sandy, can you upload the second slide? Sandy?
Yes.
Are you able to upload the second slide? Thank you. Now, I'd like to share with everyone this so-called the 3 tiers of global supply chains. Now, you can tell that before the final manufacturer on top the tip of this triangle pyramid, there could be as many as at least 3 tiers of suppliers underneath. From very bottom one, we call the very simple parts, to a little bit more complex parts or components. Then to the tier 1, we call the pre-manufacturing or pre-assembly. Before this will reach to the, we call the final manufacturers. Next one, please. Sandy?
Henry, can you just share that by yourself right now? Because her internet is not so stable.
Okay, now I'm coming here.
Yeah, now she's back. Thank you.
All right, so this one is very interesting diagram showing a typical Boeing 737 aircraft will rely on as many as 18 first-tier suppliers over 5 different countries or regions. Among those, many are very well-known world-class industries giants, such as General Electric, Spring, Mitsubishi, Fuji, Rolls-Royce, etc. The next slide, please. All right, this is the last slide. This was a study last year. It was a simulation-based analysis on the COVID-19 outbreak, predicting the impacts of epidemic outbreak on global supply chain. Now you can tell that whenever there's one single breakout in this entire chain, then obviously will make ripple effect to the rest of supply chain, no question about it. Now, okay. So based on my early illustrations, there could be 10 or more reasons causing these killing disruptions and the chopping up to this 20-year-long industry's proven systems. So what are companies changing in their global supply chain strategies in response to the pandemic? Should they move to India, to Mexico, or bring manufacture back to the US? Should they consider reshoring as an effective alternative? Or how would the Biden administration policy on supply chain will affect the economy? Now, please help me welcome the first 2 speakers for 5 minutes each. The first one, Rosemary, please.
Okay, well, that was a very, very good overview, Henry, and gives us a context from which to start the discussion. And I appreciate that. Many supply chains, global supply chains, are extremely complex with suppliers in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, all the way back to mines and fields and so forth. There could be up to 10 or more layers of supply chain. And then other supply chains are more simple and involve only a buyer and seller, maybe in a foreign country. But with that context, we're all affected by what's happening with global supply chains. I want to go back to February 13th, 2020. I do a lot of public speaking, and on that day, I was at Purdue University in Indiana, speaking to a group of about 200 supply chain people. And by then, I already knew that there was an issue, going to be a massive issue in global supply chains. Having many connections in China, I knew that there was already a problem shutting down factories and that the global supply chains were going to be taxed and be tied up and be all kinds of issues with the supply chain in early January. By February 13th, the day I was at Purdue, it was very obvious that we were going to have a massive supply chain problem. And I stood on the stage and asked everybody to raise their hand if they had a plan in place to address what was happening with COVID-19. We didn't call it a pandemic at that point. And not one of the companies, not one of the 200 companies that were there had any sort of plan in place. They were all just saying, well, we'll just didn't take it very seriously, and that they would just go with the flow and see what happens. And I kept telling them, you need to plan now. It's going to be an issue. And I don't think they took me very seriously. So by a couple weeks later, it was pretty obvious we were indeed having a problem. I think the first issue with respect to supply chains was shutting down Wuhan. Wuhan is, of course, the Detroit of China. It's where automotive parts come from. And within the first week or so of shutting down Wuhan, the Hyundai factory in Korea had to shut down because they couldn't get parts. And it had a ripple effect from there all across the world. Then we saw air cargo shutting down. Now, I don't know if you're aware, but 50% of the world's air cargo flies in the belly of passenger aircraft. So when you get on a plane and you strap in, underneath you is cargo that's being shipped along with your luggage and the passengers on top. And as you may remember, all of those passenger flights were shut down into and out of China almost immediately in March. And therefore, there was no way to move cargo. 50% of the capacity was on those passenger aircraft. So that resulted in backups for FedEx, DHL, UPS, and other cargo aircraft that had long queues waiting to get a space on those aircraft. And some companies even chartered aircraft to go in and pick up supplies from China because of the shortage of cargo space. It also increased the price because the demand was so high. And then next we started shortages in sailings. So the steamship lines around the world, thinking that we were going to have a big depression as a result of the pandemic, stopped a lot of the cargo vessels from calling the major ports. And when that happened, all of a sudden we have fewer steamship lines, container steamships that could not sail or did not call the ports of call around the world. And that put another crimp into supply chain. Now, we all thought there was going to be a bad depression, there'd be no demand, and it wouldn't be a problem because there wasn't any demand. But just the opposite happened. Most of us sat at home and bought things off Amazon, and the demand, in fact, increased during this period. Global demand for products increased during this period. And as a result, we have a shortage of air cargo movement, steamship, ocean cargo movement, or steamship cargo movement. We have backups everywhere in the ports. We have ports shutting down. We have shortages of sailings. It is chaos and remains so today.
30 seconds.
The other complicating factor is we have no industrial policy in America. And that surprised me when I first found that out. Americans believe in a market economy based on demand and don't want government's intervention as a general rule. But with the kind of shortages that we experienced during the pandemic, it's pretty obvious that now we do indeed need some kind of industrial policy. And the Biden administration, in the first couple of months of the administration, did a major supply chain study and came up with 4 areas where they're likely to support and create industrial policy for these 4 groups of commodities going forward. And those are semiconductors, rare earth elements, EV batteries, and pharmaceuticals. So I think we're going to see the development of an industrial policy at last in the United States. And with that, I'll rest for comments later.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. And if we may have time later, I would appreciate if you can come with a more recommended solutions or other. Thank you. Next one, I would like to invite John Cho. Again, John, 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank
John.
you, Henry. So for all of you, I have a little different perspective since I started in the military, and I was setting up one of the largest contract factories within our operation at All Places Minot Air Force Base, and I learned up what disruption or contingency planning was, because guess what I got? A train wreck. And I found out under the insurance rules, you have to write off the whole train, even though our product wasn't damaged. So from an early part of my career and then through the 10 years, contingency management disruptions on a global standpoint was part of sort of my makeup as I got ready for the private sector. And I want to caveat it for everybody to understand that the disruption, even with COVID, hit specific certain like industries. So it hit the pharma, it hit the healthcare. Those are examples where they really didn't plan for contingencies, where others actually did. So it's really dependent on the industry. So like when I was overseas and setting up a factory, both in Mexico and China, if I lost based upon capability, I had to plan for actually moving physical factories either nearby or actually to another country. And one thing, letting you all put you perspective, there's actually 4 areas of what we call outsourcing. So there's onshore, which is the US. There's nearshore, which could be geographically close, but not necessarily based on language. There's farshore, and there's a new one now called hybrid, where the management is based in the US and you could have the resources offshore. So there are actually 4 areas that you look at. So the key thing is that you're looking at, on a basic supply chain model, I'm gonna plan, I'm gonna basically then source it, I'm gonna make it, I'm gonna deliver it, and this sounds funny, I might return it. So after Christmas, get your cheaper thing. So that's actually built in the supply chain model. So the key thing is, this is very interesting. When we talk about COVID, and I was even educating my boss, he said, John, COVID, number 1 disruption. I said, no, number 1 disruption is actually factory fires, which are up 143% worldwide right now. That's the number 1 disruption. And then you get into mergers and acquisitions and sales. So those are all built into typical supply chain models that the standard person is going to look at, that is in the supply chain area, like all of us experts here. So that's a part of it. So as we see the different areas that are, say, influenced by all the ships backed up, it's really a logistics disruption. Then we can get into the union, we can get into the politics, and that's political. It's a different type of disruption. So the more that you add complexity into it, the more the challenge you have of actually solving the gridlock. So just to let you know, I'm working on some projects currently now, and where we're addressing the gridlock based on, of all things, resources, manpower resources. So we're looking at robots, and this is under what they call Industry 4.0, and this is the introduction of smart robots and machines, and now looking at also now the next level, which is Industry 5.0, which is actually the interactive process of people interacting smarter with machines than they do currently in any other area. So gridlock isn't new. It is something and how you view it based on your industry. And then I think you'll see that all of the experts here are actually solution providers, that they're going to think about what you're facing as an individual or a company, and then help with their expertise to build a solution that's going to help you in the market, in your productivity, and then overall lowering your costs. And then it's interesting, I'll share with you, I had an interesting situation. I had a cargo boat that was too slow. I diverted it, actually chartered a plane out of Japan, had it meet in another country, offloaded the country, and then brought it into the US to solve that problem. When I was in Mexico, I actually changed my cargo path from LA to Mexico. So all of those is where you think about creative solutions to help solve your gridlock.
Thank you, John. Now, I'd like to request Greg and also Shanghua, would you like to make any remark or comments on this topic for 2 minutes? Who would like to go first? Okay, if not, all right. Let's move on to the next one. Well, to the audience, we realize that it's almost impossible to cover any of this subject in only a few minutes, but this is only a good starting point. Therefore, we're hoping that this expert or others will be available for our future connection, network, or further discussions. Thank you for your understanding. Now, the next one, the second topic, is about Amazon's case. As of last year, the global e-commerce already reached to a record high of almost $200 billion a year with over 1 billion accounts. Among those, Amazon contributed over $30 billion sales a year. Over 40% of Amazon suppliers come from China. In the industry, it's quite common that a seller will take advantage of online shopping frenzy, using old and new methods to boost the rating on products. So reviews and inflated ratings have been problems for Amazon and others in the industry. Some consider it as an internal issue. Some will consider those actions taken by Amazon legitimate. It will be very appropriate to perhaps to resharp the industry's ethical standards. So when Amazon blocked accounts in violation of its rules, obviously they also hit other related accounts. So was this a penalty decision based on the rules of the platforms, or was it a strategic decision? Either way, this a sharp rebuke by Amazon could easily paralyze the upstream supply chain and destroy Chinese enterprises in very large quantity. Other major players such as Walmart, eBay, Costco, are they also victimized by this case? Or have they been benefited from this? Now, please help me welcome the next two speakers for 5 minutes each. First one, I'd like to invite Shanghua Young.
Thank you, Henry, for giving me the opportunity to talk about Amazon. When we talk about Amazon, I think we should put things in perspective. Yes, there are a lot of different views about this. Some of them think this is politically motivated. Some of them think this is a good business decision. So let me put things in perspective. First of all, we know there are about over 3,000 sellers have been banned from Amazon right now. Now, however, Amazon has about 800,000 Chinese sellers. So that means the ones that have been banned just made up of about 0.4% of all sellers. That's not a very big number, right? If you think that way. And so why there's such a shock wave going through, and why there are so many debates? I actually looked it up, and in fact, the mainstream media actually has not paid a lot of attention to it. And what did that mean? It probably means the mainstream media believes this is probably not politically motivated. If it is, I think that it will caught mainstream media a lot of attention. So mainstream media probably think this is an internal business decision. In fact, in many ways, I would say it is. This is not the first time that a platform like Amazon has purged sellers like this. It has happened in the past. Alibaba has purged many sellers in China. And so why this would cause so much attention? I think a lot of attention actually is within the Chinese community here in the US and in China. Because today, the internet goes, viral immediately. So the Chinese began to feel that this is politically motivated. And in fact, I taught a class today, international business class. I sort of took a little pulse among my students. And I discussed this with them, and I asked them, do they feel that this is politically motivated? About 30% think that is politically motivated. The rest of them did not think so. So I would say, if it's probably less politically motivated. However, the timing is pretty interesting. If it happens another time when there was no political tension, trade war between these two countries, it probably would not be viewed that way. However, because we are really in the midst of all the trade conflicts, and still we haven't really seen a lot of light in the tunnel yet. And so it can be easily viewed that way. And the other thing is, anytime you have anything to do with China, the magnitude, the volume is really is the issue. Yes, when we talk about 3,000 sellers, that's a big number. For any country, would be very big number. But for China, it is not. I already gave you the number, right? And the 75% of new sellers on Amazon right now are from China. So that means the number of Chinese sellers is still increasing, even though the 3,000, about 3,000 plus have been purged from Amazon. So I personally would not think that it's really it's like a Jeff Bezos had a conversation with President Biden and say, look, I'm going to help you with your negotiation position by purging these Chinese sellers who just did something which is abnormal. And I do think this is actually should be viewed seriously. The reason is, there could be a ripple effect if we don't stop these sellers from conducting, unethical business. I think it's on the borderline unethical. I know that there are many seller vendors doing this, but it still doesn't make it right. I actually have seen those cards, little cards put it in a package. Put it in a package and give all these, incentives. If you buy, it will tell you, what you will get if you do this. Contact us directly, so that you can feature, you buy directly from us instead of from Amazon. And so of course, if
20 seconds.
Okay, if you don't follow the rules of the game, I think that Amazon has the right to do what it makes sense to them. So in a nutshell, I think that the both sides should not take this politically. It should be a moment of teaching, because if these sellers get away with this, that means the other 800,000 sellers could say, well, if they can get away from this, I can get away as well. Now, that would totally disrupt the marketplace if we allow that, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Professor Young. The next one, would like to welcome Great Tanaka, please.
Thank you, Henry. I largely agree with the professor on a lot of her comments. I'd like to give a different perspective as well, which is that retail is changing. And we all know that retail is changing from offline to online. We're all ordering more and more stuff online. But the change that a lot of people haven't really seen, but it's pretty dramatic, is this whole idea of direct to consumer. So in the past, the retailer and the manufacturer would be separate. But what's starting to happen is they're starting to become the same. And so the great thing about that is they're more responsive to consumer demand, which is great. And it usually has lower prices to the consumer. So it's kind of a win-win. Now, I think the ramifications of all this is a lot of those manufacturers actually are from China, right? And what is the impact of all of this? And I think what we should do as a country is really focus on what is the impact to the consumer? How do we make sure the consumer in our country gets the lowest price and the best quality and the best service? And with that kind of as the North Star for us, that's, I think, how we should form our policies. So for instance, for the past three and a half years or so, there's been a steady push to raise tariffs, not just with China, but with other countries as well. And this actually, tariffs are actually one of the things that started World War II, right? Really, World War II, part of the economic depression. I mean, just a lot of issues. And the rise of tariffs, especially on Chinese goods from the previous administration, really overall was not good, right? I think it caused an escalation of trade relations. It increased prices for the consumer. It helped some manufacturers here, but not a whole lot. And one thing that it did on Amazon, if you look at some of the charts, is the Amazon sellers that were US based got hurt a lot more than the ones that were China based. So that wasn't good. It kind of backfired, even though you would think it should actually help a lot of the US sellers. Now, the reviews and ratings, I think the professor is absolutely right. There's been a lot of stories about people getting shipped things they didn't order so they could actually show, fake numbers and have fake reviews. And so in the lens of trying to make sure that we have the best consumer experience and prices, I think eliminating these bad reviews, eliminating sellers who are being manipulative is actually really important. And I understand Amazon's point of view, which is it's hard to do because there's so many of them and they're like whack-a-mole. You hit one on the head and another one pops up. And so I think using technology, machine learning is actually a really good thing, a good way of trying to solve this problem because it's really hard to do manually. I think Amazon's been trying to do that. I think technology is something where technology is a place where this could actually help improve the situation. Ironically, the current congressperson is trying to ban recommendation engines or this kind of technology, but I think for us, it could actually help the consumer at the end. The other aspect to think about is the inflationary policies that we have. They're really hurting the working poor, but with free trade, this will help the inflation. This will actually help keep prices in check and help keep things affordable. I've already heard from a lot of people about the rising cost of things from gasoline to food. I heard it's going to be expensive Thanksgiving this year, and so that's a big problem. And I saw one of the questions from one of the attendees about running the ports 24/7. So my wife worked at a company called Flexport, which is a shipping logistics company, and she was telling me about all the stories about how freight went from a couple thousand to an order of magnitude more. And so I think running the ports 24/7, trying to really streamline the trade among countries, both from tariffs as well as logistics, is actually really important. And it's a way to actually help overall economic prosperity for the country. And so I think that, having the reviews in a more, truthful reviews, having, intellectual property that we're not, people aren't infringing on other people's intellectual property is actually really important. Although I think Amazon probably could have done it in a more gradual way instead of just all at once. But I know how tough it is technology-wise because there's so many new sellers popping up. It's hard to know who's legit and who's not. But in general, I think we want to really promote the experience for consumers and really make sure that they have good prices, good products, and good service. And so everything should be kind of in support of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg. I'd like to request the other two speakers, if you'd like to make a comment, John or Rosemary.
I have a comment.
Yeah, 2 minutes, please.
So I too have a client who told me they were paying 17 times more for a container from Asia to the US than they were just 2 years ago. And of course, there's an awful lot of products that are stuck out in the ocean with big queues at the port of Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Oakland, where that cargo just isn't moving. But it doesn't stop just at the port. It also includes all of the truckers, the warehouse networks, and the final mile distribution that includes the whole supply chain that is disrupted at this point. Difficulty finding truck drivers. There are all kinds of issues up and down the supply chain. I think what we're seeing, though, is an economic shakeout. And by that, I mean those products that cannot handle the additional logistics costs, those companies are going to go out of business because they simply can't afford the logistics cost. And so we're going to continue to see this kind of shakeout until the logistics world rights itself. And I think that's 18 to 24 months out before we get in the container imbalance addressed, more steamship lines calling on the ports, more air cargo capacity, and so that we can get things moving around the world once again.
Thank you, Rosemary. John, you want to make any remark for 2 minutes?
Yeah,
John?
I'll make a comment from a different perspective. So when I was in China and I was exporting to the US, I actually had to forecast 2 years in advance of my cargo and the freight that I had to do and the containers. So that model hasn't changed in decades. So the problem is you have a limited capacity, and then when you increase the demand, then it's like, where are you going to get the containers? So for most people in perspective, if you don't have ships on the water in July, your chances of getting anything into the US just on a continuous supply standpoint are going to be very limited. So this is not a new problem. And by the way, Asia was actually led the effort in upgrading all of their ports along all of the Asian corridor to support the influx into the US. The US didn't really upgrade it. So now with all of the disruptions we're going through, you're seeing a significant one. And as the professor said and Greg said, all of a sudden now you have multi-disruptions going on, and it's more complex. So you're looking at leadership and what is the prioritization that you're going to do to end this. And people ask, how long is it going to take? It could take 6 months. It could take a year. It could take a couple years. So that gives you perspective of what's going on from somebody actually importing to the U.S.
Thank you, John. Now, before we move
Well,
on,
Henry, can I make one else? Do you have time for one other comment, or do you have to run? You have to move on.
No, unfortunately, later.
No problem.
Hopefully, we'll have time. Thank you. Apologize for that. Before we move on to the last topic, I'd like to request all 4 panelists, please leave your contact information in the WeChat box so that audience will be able to contact you for their further question or inquiries. Thank you so much for your cooperation. Now we are moving to the last topic, the US-China trade war. Now that began in early year 2018, that was 3.5 years ago. The average US tariff on imports from China remained elevated at 19.3%. These tariffs are more than 6 times higher than before the trade war began, and covering 67% of Chinese export to the US. So as if the Amazon purge wasn't enough, the US is imposing high import dues from China, leaving our community curious about this impending impact on what is already a tense trade relations. So how should future negotiation be anyhow smoother given today's global supply chain gridlock and Amazon's purge of China suppliers? Or would there be any other long-term alternative solution to ease this Cold War? Now I'd like to invite all 4 panelists in the order I will offer in seconds. Now, please keep in mind, everyone only has 3 minutes because we already run out of time. First one, John Cho, please, followed by Greg.
Well, I think one of the interesting things, and I'll share with you, when I was in China, I was at a dinner one night, and I got asked point blank, do you believe that we should invade Taiwan? Now, it was quite an interesting question to me, and my answer was, it's not about the means you're doing, it's about the culture and becoming a unity in a circle again. And everybody was satisfied with that. So conflict has been there. We get too caught up in the politics in that, and we have to focus on what is the demand and supply. And here's an interesting one for everybody. The number 1 country for revenue is not China, it's actually India. So it depends on what you're doing. So conflict has been there. It's always going to be in there. And it depends a lot on the leadership that we're exercising in the U.S. and the policies and the relationship we have with counter trade with China as well as any other country.
Henry, I think you're muted.
Yeah, Henry, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Great, please.
Sure. Thank you. I think for us, it's really important to be good partners with China. They have the world's largest population. They're the second largest economy, and they might be there on their way to become the first largest economy. And if we have a strong economic partnerships, strong trade between the countries, there's less chance of a war, whether it's warm or cold. And so I think that's something for us to think about. It's actually very important. They're also large manufacturers for us. So I think those are all kind of big factors. I think what we should shoot for is economic efficiency and vibrancy. As I mentioned earlier, I think free trade is the way to go. I think what we did the past 3.5 years under the previous administration wasn't the right direction. Even the current congressperson from my area, she's pushed for tariffs on medicines into our country, which probably is not the right thing to do either. If we look at command and control type economies, authoritarian type of economies versus market-based or capitalistic economies always have done better. Planned economies tend not to do so well. It's really hard to plan for all of that. I've been in the semiconductor industry for many years, and I could tell you a lot about the semiconductor shortage that we've been having and how it kind of permeates everything. Almost everything now has some sort of semiconductor in it. And I had an office in Shenzhen for many years as part of my company. And so I have a somewhat of an inside view of China. And I can tell you, China, a lot of their leaders actually have very strong technical backgrounds, and they have the will and resources to try to become number one. So I think one thing, and I saw one of the questions from one of the attendees about IP, intellectual property rights, and I've worked for an intellectual property company. Probably one of the largest intellectual property companies, as well as SNOPS, which is the world's largest electronic design and automation company, $50 billion company. I remember once going to China, and I visited Huawei, and they were at that time one of the largest chip designers in China, and they had something like 50 design seats for chip design software at the time, which was ridiculous because they had at least 2,000 or more, maybe 5,000 people designing chips there. And so it kind of shows you the IP issues at that time. It's gotten a lot better, and I think it's got a lot better because China actually has a lot of their own design now, and there's a lot more for them to protect. But I think it's important that we do protect our IP, and that we insist that China protects it as well. We want to make sure it's reciprocal. It's very important. I think in regards to Taiwan, it's a very strategic country, right? A lot of the TSMC, the largest semiconductor manufacturer in the world, is based there. It's really important that they remain independent, that they remain good allies with our country. It's great to see TSMC actually putting manufacturing plants in the United States. I think that's important. It's good to fail safe. But I think the thing that we have to really think about is how do we stay number one? For the past, since World War II, we've been the world leader. And one reason why we've been the world leader is because we've been a country of immigrants. We've been very open to immigrants. But I can tell you, like my company, we've hired people from Stanford, Berkeley with PhDs, and some of them had to go back to China and India. What we should be doing is especially with people with advanced degrees, we should almost insist that they stay here, not push them out. And so that was also kind of a wrong-headed move in terms of our immigration policy. We want the best, brightest, most ambitious, hardworking people in our country. I think that's really important. And I don't know if some of the previous administration, but even the current administration, I don't think has been as cognizant of that. I think the other thing that we should be thinking about is the U.S. dollar has been the world currency, so to speak. Oil is denominated in dollars, the whole petrodollar thing. But you look at China in their CBDC, central bank digital currency, they've been pushing pretty hard to displace the US dollar. So I think we have to think about that. Unfortunately, I think a lot of our leaders right now aren't thinking about the fact that China is pushing really hard to displace the US dollar as the global currency. And that's going to make our lives here in our country very, very difficult because we enjoy very low interest rates. We enjoy, the fact that we can run up really big debts because we are the global currency. But if we lose that, that's something that we have to worry about. And I think not enough attention is being put on that. I think the other thing that we've been lacking is a response to China's Belt and Road Initiative. And unfortunately, even some of our leaders here in our country don't even know what that is. But it's a dramatic effort from China. They call it the New Silk Road, right? They're basically putting massive infrastructures, all the way from China all the way to Europe, through Africa, a whole bunch of different countries, and they're trying to have an immense international presence. And I don't think we've been very good about responding to that. China is becoming like the preferred trade partner as a result. And so we have to think about that and how do we counterbalance all of that. And yeah, I think the other aspect that we should be thinking about in our country is, we have something pending called the PRO Act, which makes it very hard to be independent contractors. And so that's another thing that we should be solving, is how to make sure that, we make it easy to do business here, because, what's happening in China is starting to crack down on some of their tech companies. They also have been making it tougher to do business in China. And so that's an opportunity for us, but we should not respond the same. We should actually make it easier for us. So we should make it easier for business to happen in our country, not harder. As well as promoting some of the things like autonomous driving. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you so much. I apologize. Unfortunately, I wish we could have more time for everyone to freely express your opinion. And again, fortunately, I've been given a very limited amount of time. I apologize for this. Xiaohua, would you please? And then the final one will be Rosemary. Xiaohua, please.
Yes. So I want to share with the audience what I learned from a dear friend of mine, a dear friend of Cbsi, Bob Sealing. Bob Sealing is China legend. He unfortunately passed away not too long ago. But here's something I will ever remember what he said. He actually told me what the late Secretary of State George Shultz told him. He said, for China, US-China relationship, it's a dynamic, complex. You got to have a different approach. And the approach that George Shultz proposed is this. You're going to have three buckets. The one bucket for all the issues that you can easily agree on. And one bucket for the issues you probably will never agree on. And one bucket for issues you may and may not agree on. I thought that's a great approach, because something that you can never agree on, why do you spend time on, right? Put in the bucket, leave it aside. Something that you can easily agree on, you probably don't need to spend a lot of time, and you can work together easily. And you might want to spend more energy on the areas where there's a possibility you can agree on, but it takes some time to work it out. That's the middle bucket. Middle bucket, the first bucket. So I thought, here, climate change and issues like climate change, right? And terrorism, and these are issues, are global issue. Hardly any country can go alone to tackle it. It needs global partnership. This is where the two world's largest economy should work together, work on that bucket. And there are issues like what they all mentioned about Taiwan and some other issues, something you probably never be able to agree on. So leave it alone, don't spend too much energy on it. And so I'm going to say that the Amazon issue is one of the things which actually the two countries probably can utilize to actually ease the trade relationship. Here's a bunch of Chinese sellers who I think they have very questionable business practices, and they literally violate the rules of the platform, the company, and here these are the ones probably I think in China side, the policy side, I think they should use this as a moment of teaching and sort of do something and. To help US, to help a company like Amazon, but I heard actually there was something just the opposite. I heard that that these Chinese sellers were given actually some help to set up a separate platform to sell on their own. But I thought that maybe they should reconsider that kind of approach. It's a time because it's no longer, like 30, 40 years ago where, the competition is just ruthless and tough and people just don't follow any rules. I know in those days, I mean, even some of the biggest, the best company in China, have done that, and even that US as well, did not follow a rule, carry out some very questionable business, conduct. And so, but today is, things become more transparent, things are, we have the AI platform, and why, Amazon able to identify the 3,000 companies because they have AI powered system. They can identify easily, right? And so why there's so many China, because I said, it's magnitude, anything about China is just big volume, big magnitude. It sounds pretty bad. Sounds pretty bad, right? But it's in reality may not. So I just think that the both sides should not finger point, should not, company-wise should not take sides, be pragmatic and solve the real world problem. Well, I think that you want to stop, otherwise I'll continue. So I'll come back if there's opportunity, okay?
Thank you. Last but not least, Rosemary, please.
Thank you for leaving me for last so I can wrap it up. First of all, I have a comment that Greg mentioned something that I think is very, very important. And that's that the leaders of China are primarily engineers and scientists. So the leadership, the highest levels of government are people with a certain perspective. And what are they in the US? They're almost all lawyers. And that to me is a very fundamental problem when you're trying to negotiate with one another. If you approach a situation, a problem from different perspectives. Dr. Yang mentioned, putting things in 3 buckets, and that one bucket in the middle where there's potential for negotiation and really making some progress is very, very important. Mm-hmm. And that is where I think the tariffs on US imports or imports to the US from China and vice versa. So the 301 tariffs and the 232 tariffs on imports into the US need to be renegotiated. As Greg pointed out, these are taxes. They are additional costs, but add no value. And that's a problem. That makes everything more expensive. It doesn't add any value to what we're buying. And it's just not the right thing to do economically. So we need to put that in the center bucket. We need to look at it from both perspectives, a lawyer arguing one side and a scientist arguing the other side. And understand that at some point we need to get the temperature to come down a little bit and to really negotiate those differences so we can get rid of those tariffs. And long term, I think that's the right thing to do. However, they are quite popular in the US, especially in the red states, in the central US where most of the manufacturing is done. Those tariffs are very popular and are thought to be sort of anti-import so that more manufacturing can happen in America. And that is the way that people are thinking about it, talking about it, and therefore our politicians in the US are going to respond that way. So it's up to a lot of us who have a better, more thorough economic understanding to try to educate people and to help them understand that these tariffs are simply taxes on incoming goods into the US that we are all paying for. Every one of us as consumers pay for those tariffs. So that's one thing. The US-China trade issues, I think taking down the temperature after the Trump administration really ignited the fire is important, and that will come down little by little, I think, over time. Catherine Tai, our new US trade representative, is well educated and experienced and level-headed, and hopefully that will help calm things down as we go forward. But it isn't going to happen overnight. There's a lot of damage that was done, and I think now is the time for us to start repairing that damage.
Thank you so much. Now, thanks to all the speakers. This wraps up today's panel sessions. special thanks to all the sponsored parties. And later on, we would like to name each one of them. But now I'd like to hand over to Hong Fang for the Q&A. Hong?
Great. Okay, thank you to our panel.